Today we're going to turn a custom leather burnishing tool out of cocobolo. So let's have some fun with that. Thanks for watching today. For those of you that don't know what a leather burnishing tool is, when you cut leather, it leaves the edge kind of rough, and any leather worker that's good likes to finish all those edges. So a leather burnishing tool is a tool that you can rub on that edge with a little bit of wax sometimes to burnish that edge or shine it up and make it look finished. Recently, at a farmer's market where I sell my work, I ran into a leather worker, and my wallet had just been falling apart and I needed a new one. And so Chad at Knotted Leathers made me this wallet, and it is beautiful, and I smile a little bit every time I put it in my pocket. It just feels so great. It is shell cordoban and it has a kangaroo interior. And if you'd like to watch him make this wallet, he just started a YouTube channel, and I'm going to put a link in the description so that you can go check him out making this wallet, as well as a lot of other great leather work that he does. In this video, I'm going to take this piece of cocobolo, which is a good wood because of its density for leather burnishing tools, and I'm going to make a handheld leather burnishing tool for Chad at Knotted Leathers. Hopefully, you'll get to see him use this tool as he does some of his work on his channel. I'm Jason Geiser, and this is Geiserwoodturner. Let's make a handheld leather burnishing tool. So today we're going to start with a piece of cocobolo that I've already made round. And a lot of times I do this because they come to me covered in wax and I want them to dry out a little bit before I actually get them on the lathe and start working with them. So I'll put this in the chuck. We're going to mount it in the chuck on one side and bring the tailstock up. And it's not going to be perfectly centered anymore since I turned it the first time. So I'm going to take the spindle roughing gouge once I get this tightened up, and we're going to make a few passes and make it completely round again, so we have something that's a good surface to start with to start making our layout lines. Now the first feature that we want to lay out is a point on the end of the tool, and we're going to come down about 3 inches from the end. You can go a little bit more if you'd like, and then we're just going to taper it down to a point from there. And a lot of times this point is used to put inside a hole and to twist and to burnish the inside of a hole or a tight spot. It can also be used as a handle, so sometimes you might want to make it a little bit longer. But we're going to leave a lot of room on the other end so that we can put a lot of grooves on this particular burnishing tool. So I'm going to take my spindle gouge, and we'll just start to make a point on the end here. And I'm going to start here on the corner and just work away a little bit of wood at a time, work my way down to that tailstock, and then we'll just increase that taper as we go. We'll work our way over to that line, taking off a little bit at a time. And eventually we'll get down to where we make this completely into a point, and so it's not connected to the tailstock at all. But I want to leave some material here so that it supports all the other cuts that I make. So we're basically just roughing it out right now, and then we're going to put the grooves on the other side before we continue to taper it down and make it into a point. Now on the other end, with a ruler and a pencil, we're going to start to lay out our grooves that we want to have. And these are the grooves that the leather rides in order to burnish it. And the first one I'm going to do is about 1/2 inch. And then in between each of our coves that we make is going to be an 1/8 inch ridge. So I'm going to go 1/2 inch. I went down to 3/8, 5/16, 1/4 inch, an 1/8 inch, and then I did a 1/16 slot, and then I'm going to do a V groove on the end. All those with a 1/8 inch spacing in between. And you can space these out however you like. There's no real pattern to it, but you just want to have a good variety of different grooves that you can rub different sizes of leather into so that you can make this tool work for you. And then at the end, we're going to completely round it and try and get a really nice, smooth, rounded, almost ball end for doing any other type of burnishing that you might want to do with the end. Okay, that looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do is just trace these out with the pencil and come across and just rotate the spindle by hand as we go and move our way across. And the spacing isn't terribly critical. We're just kind of doing a layout right now. Later on, once we start cutting the coves into the piece, we're probably going to have to stop and measure again just to make sure that our layout lines are correct and that we can move across the piece with a good spacing. Alright, and checking that now, that looks pretty good. Now I just want to turn on the lathe and I'm going to move the pencil across and color in the places that I'm going to cut out. That way I know which places are the cutout spaces and which are the spaces that I want to leave. Now it's time to start making our coves into the piece of wood. If you're not practiced at making coves, it's probably a good idea to practice on a less expensive piece of wood. That way you know that you're going to do well as you come across and make these coves. So just work your way to those lines, making that cove deeper and deeper as you go. And you want to try and get it as deep as you can. By the time we get to the other end, there's going to be some limitations as far as how deep we can go with our tools. So when we start out on this 1/2 inch one, make it as deep as you can go. And we'll move on to the 3/8 piece. And leaving that 1/8 of an inch in between. And just make a cove and keep making it deeper and deeper until it's to the desired depth and it's right where we want it. Now it's a good idea as you go across to stop and put a ruler on top and just check your spacing and make sure that you're exactly where you want it to be, and then continue on and keep cutting those coves. Now on this one, I closed the flute of the gouge, or I turned it a little bit too much and oops, I skated across. So after a few choice words, I have to decide what am I going to do to fix this. Now I decided I have a little bit of extra thickness in this piece of wood, and so I'll take down the spacing in between and I'll just bring the depth of the whole piece down just a little bit. But now I'm going to have to go back and fix all of the grooves that I had just made. So all those coves have to be deepened just a little bit and brought out to make that 1/8 inch spacing between them again. But sometimes you have to deal with things like that. All of us make mistakes every once in a while, and it's good to know how to fix them, or some things that you can think about when those type of things happen. And so once I get that corrected, I can move on and keep working my way down to the end of this burnisher. At some point, my 3/8 spindle gouge is going to be just a little bit too big as I work my way down. So I've switched to using a 1/4 inch spindle gouge, and that's a 1/4 inch shaft size of the spindle gouge. That's the way that we measure them in America. In the UK, they measure a spindle gouge by the flute size. But that's going to allow me to get in and make some smaller grooves. And I can get down with my 1/4 inch spindle gouge to make a groove about 1/8 of an inch wide. The problem with it is that with a smaller piece of metal, I can't reach in as far before I start getting a lot of vibration, so I won't be able to go as deep as I went on the other end. So with these last two grooves, I'm going to have to get a little bit creative as far as shape. I'm going to pull out my narrow parting tool and we're just going to make a square groove, and that's 1/16 wide. And then for the very last one, I'm going to make a V groove. So I'll pull out a small skew chisel, and with the point of the tool, I'm going to come in one side at a time, and we're just going to work our way down so that at the bottom of this groove, it's going to be a very small V point that you could put some really thin leather in if you needed to and get a nice burnished edge. Now with that V groove complete, the only thing we have left to do is to round down the end. And so for that, I'm going to get out my 3/8 spindle gouge again, because that's a good shaping tool to work with. And we're just going to kind of start over as far as we can and work our way over until we just get a nice rounded shape right here. And I'll kind of make a back cut to remove some material. Be careful not to get your tool too close to that chuck. And we'll just keep cutting away till I've got a nice rounded profile here, and I have enough wood removed that I can just part it off later. I want to leave enough wood so that I can go back to the other end and work on that point without having too much vibration and without any risk of it twisting off or anything like that, because I don't want to ruin it at this point. Back down at the other end, we're going to remove as much material as we can before we remove the tailstock. Get a nice even profile, and then we'll take off the rest of that wood right here. And there's going to be a little dimple in the end, so I'm going to have to keep working it down. And I'm using my hand to support the wood because there's going to be a lot of vibration without the tailstock in place. So just lightly rest my hand on it and put opposite pressure from the pressure that I'm applying with my spindle gouge, and just work my way down. We're going to try and make that come down to a nice even point. I don't want it to be super sharp, but I want it to be sharp enough that we could put it into a small hole. And then I'll take my skew chisel and do a nice planing cut to smooth everything out and make that all ready to sand. And that should be good. So as I sand this piece, I'm going to start out with a 120 grit and work my way to about 320 or 400. Now I'm going to go over the outside, and then as I get to these grooves or coves, I'm going to fold the sandpaper over and use its natural curvature to sand the inside of that cove. And that works really well to use the stiffness of the sandpaper for that. And then as you get to the smaller and smaller grooves, you may have to just fold it completely in half and use that edge to do the inside. At this point, I completely missed a portion of the video where I rubbed walnut oil into this piece and I parted it off of the lathe. I apologize for that, but you can watch me part something off in another video. At this point, we just have a little nub on the end that I'm going to remove with a pocket knife. Just make sure your thumb is below the area that you're cutting, and pull across the grain and remove that little nub. And then the only thing we have to do is sand this little rough area here. And I'm going to use a power sander for this, but you can always hand sand this if you like. If you're using a power sander, just be careful to use a really light touch so you don't put a whole bunch of facets in the end that would look kind of funny and not smooth anymore when you get completely done. As you get to the end of the grits, I'll use a nice soft disc and a really fine sandpaper and work my way across, keeping everything smooth. And that makes it look like it's really been rounded well. And you can almost not tell that it was on a lathe. And then I'll also do a little bit of hand sanding right at the end, just to completely smooth everything up. If you're power sanding, it doesn't quite take that rounded shape as well as if you wrap the sandpaper around and make it work for you. Then we're just going to add a little bit of walnut oil to the end and finish everything off. Walnut oil is a drying oil, so we'll want to set that aside for a few days to completely dry before we buff it. The final touch on this piece is I want to take some carnauba wax or carnauba wax, however you say it. It's one of the hardest natural waxes. We're going to put it on a buffing wheel, and we're going to buff and shine this nice piece of cocobolo and make it look just beautiful. Now keep in mind that as you use this as a burnishing tool, it's going to wear off any finish that you're going to put on it in those grooves. And that's what you want. You want it to get down to the wood and use that to burnish with. But I like to make it look as beautiful as possible before I get it done. So we'll do this one last step. I appreciate you turning with me today. It's been a lot of fun. And yeah, look at that piece of cocobolo. I love it. It is beautiful. So I hope that you have as much fun making in your shop. And if you've liked this video at all, or you want to subscribe to my channel, you know what to do. We'll see you soon.